This is Global Connections. My name is Dr. James Primm, and I'm the guest host today. I'm a professor of international relations at Hawaii Pacific University. I have two students with me. One is Michael Lanza, and the other one is Allen Bageant. And today the topic is going to be the politics of terrorism and the future of terrorism, and what our two particular students we kind of talked about in class for these last couple of decades. So I have a series of questions for both of them. One thing is kind of interesting is because after 9/11, I think we talk about the world changing. But when I asked my students, where were they on 9/11, now I'm realizing that this was 15 years ago, and some of these kids were 4 and 5 years old, so they were not engaged. But luckily, we have two older students who are also veterans, and so I want to introduce them first, and they can talk a little bit about themselves, where they're from, and what they're doing in school, and then we'll have some specific questions I want to ask them. So, Michael, please.
Okay, my name is Michael Lanza, student of Diplomacy and Military Studies at Hawaii Pacific University. I've kind of grown up all over the country. Last place I grew up was Chicago, and that's from where I made my way out to Hawaii and ended up joining the Army. So.
Okay, Al?
Good morning, my name is Allen Bageant, also former HPU student and former student of Dr. Primm. I'm currently in the graduate program taking the same classes as Mike here in the Diplomacy and Military Studies. I was in the Navy for 7 years active, and I've been in the reserve for the last 8 years. So seen it from both sides a little bit. So. And I'm originally from Virginia, and I found my way out here in the 90s for HPU undergrad, and I just keep coming back.
Okay, good. So let's kind of go back a little bit, because Alan was actually in my class before 9/11, about 1996, right? And then Michael's now in my class currently. But I'm going to ask you the same questions I asked everybody else. Kind of where were you at 9/11? Everybody remembers that. And then also, what was your kind of initial reaction? So let's start with Mike, and then we'll go down.
Well, I was 18 years old at the time. I was driving to work that morning. I was living in Chicago, suburbs of Chicago. And for some reason, that morning was a particularly good morning for me. It was beautiful out that day. It was a Tuesday morning in the middle of fall. And I stopped to get coffee on the way, and I was driving to work, and I just remember feeling this sense of just gratitude. My life was going very well. I just graduated high school, was dating a beautiful girl, and I get to work, and about 20 minutes after I arrive, I start hearing everyone, the panic was spreading through the office, and, that's when the world changed for me, so.
Okay, Alan?
Well, I was at the Surface Warfare Officers Training School in Rhode Island, Newport, Rhode Island. And I was a junior officer, and it was where they sent us to learn how to drive ships, essentially. Learn the difference between port and starboard and things like that. So I was in my early stages of military training, and then ironically, I'd actually been in New York City right by the trade towers, not 2 days before, but 9 days before the previous weekend. So we were taking a test on navigation or something like that, and then the way it works is when you finish, to leave the other students alone, you go out in the hall and you wait in the lounge, and there's a television. So as we trickled out of the classroom, we saw what was going on, and the students and instructors who were still taking the test, eventually would all come out one at a time. And in the beginning, they didn't know what was going on, so they had everybody move their cars, precautionary, just move them far from the building. And I had ridden my bicycle in, so I had it right around the pole outside, so I was the only one who got to just sit in there and watch the whole thing, and saw the tower come down.
Okay. Yeah, and what's interesting is I've been teaching the politics of terrorism class. I started teaching in the 1980s, and then I think when kind of the Middle East calmed down a little bit, I didn't teach any longer. But then about 1998, 99, you had the rise of Al-Qaeda, and you had the Cole bombing and some bombings in Africa. So I started teaching the class again. It turned out that I was teaching that particular class on the night of 9/11. So it was kind of, in some ways, the worst class I've ever had in my life, and the best class. You certainly had people who were tuned in. And ever since that time, I've been teaching this course, a politics of terrorism course, for the last 15 years, at least once or twice a semester. It's really been kind of an ongoing kind of case study. So let me go back to both of you, and I'll start with Alan this time. Is that because you were a little bit older, did you had maybe not having, because you already had graduated in international relations was a major?
Yes.
Of course. Did you think right away, this is bin Laden, this is terrorism, make it that kind of connection, or was it just kind of more chaotic?
I think at the time I wasn't, it looked like terrorism. Remember that summer, I think all the news was shark attacks in Gary Condon looking for that missing intern, Chandra Levy.
Okay.
So there was no high tension with China and North Korea. So it didn't strike me as who specifically it was. We knew lots of people didn't like us, but that nothing came to mind of, well, it must be Saddam or the Ayatollahs or something like that.
Okay. And Mike?
I had no idea at first who it was. I just remember feeling just devastated, I mean, here I was, an 18-year-old kid, just graduated high school, and my country's under attack.
Right.
I called my mom, I said, what's going on? She's like, I have no idea. She'd been watching the news. The news wasn't very helpful because they kept showing the towers coming down over and over and over again. It was like just seeing someone die on TV. That's how I felt.
Sure.
And like the rest of America at the time, I had no idea what was going on. I just was glued to the TV, hoping the news anchors could tell me what was going on.
Okay. Now, was there kind of visceral reaction? Okay, I want to join the military and get back at it. Did that come later or not? Or?
Yeah, that was. I had always thought about it. I wasn't in the process of thinking about it. But as soon as those towers came down, I gave it a heavy thought. Unfortunately, where my life was at that time, I wasn't in the process to actually join.
Yeah.
That would come later in my life.
Okay.
But I think that definitely planted the seeds for me joining the military.
Okay, good. Let me get back to you again, Mike. One of the questions is, how do you think that the United States' immediate reaction was? And I guess really I'm talking about going into Afghanistan. Do you think it was too soon, not soon enough? I mean, because I think in hindsight, now that you've grown up, 18-year-olds maybe didn't think a lot about that, but you probably have some perhaps opinions on it now.
I mean, that's a complex question. I mean, I obviously didn't have the intelligence, being a U.S. citizen that, the government had.
Yeah.
In hindsight, should we have gone in? Should we have waited? I mean, I can't answer that. Even looking back now with all that I know about what's going on in the world, what happened to lead up to that, I'm not sure. I think going into Iraq, I think that was probably something that we could have waited on.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that later.
Sure.
But because obviously America was in shock, and some people wanted just kind of visceral reactions. Let's just bomb the hell out of everybody. But who is everybody? And other people say, well, we need to. This is a crime against humanity, and we need to kind of arrest these people. So there was a big debate, and some people kind of think we overreacted, and some people say, no, we didn't kind of go far enough. So, Alan, what did you think at the time?
Remember, Bush was fairly new in office, and there were a lot of European countries weren't, not anti-U.S., but they preferred Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
So there was the silver lining to an attack like this is that citizens of all sorts of nations died, and they all were innocently attacked. So they all sort of coalesced around this common objective. Okay, this is evil, and we need to find a way to combat it. Now, as to how they did it, I wasn't in a position to really know, but you have standing forces, you have campaign plans. But Afghanistan was never one of the military's major plans that you have to just dust off the shelf to attack Afghanistan.
Yeah, in many ways, people say we abandoned it after the Soviets left, and that was.
We never had a thorough plan of how to. We didn't even know so much as the soil composition of how trucks and tanks would work in it. So there's a lot of planning that has to come with that.
Right.
So you can't. The initial reaction is, as soon as we find out who did this, we need to get them severely now. But you're going to make it worse if you're not prepared to go in and do it. So that's why there was an understandable delay. I don't think it was too late or too soon to go into Afghanistan. You can argue about how we did it, but as far as the timing, I don't have any.
Well, the early intervention was really a lot of the CIA had kind of the only people who kind of could move relatively quickly in a small group, and I think they did a pretty good job. And then the military kind of came on beyond that. Okay, let me ask the next question is because you both were in the military, did either one of your jobs entail having to kind of deal with directly or indirectly with terrorism in any way, shape, or form? Either one.
Well, yes, I was stationed in the Pacific.
Okay.
So again, you've got tensions with China and North Korea, but the only shooting in the Pacific is terrorism, non-state actors. So that was the Philippines especially, and that was about the time Jamal Islamiyah in Indonesia was really coming about.
Abu Sayyaf.
But Abu Sayyaf, who had never really gone along or gone away, was now back in the news.
Right.
And there was a push to try to really, the More Islamic Liberation Front, again, the same groups, Southern Mindanao and the Philippines. Now there was a real effort to go after what is now considered a global problem, and more partnership attitude from everyone out there. That the Philippines, that's our priority may be Islamic terrorism of Abu Sayyaf in the south. That's not their main terror concern. But now that we start to see eye to eye, and we focused on those things. That was my role in the Pacific.
Yeah.
But ships stationed in the East Coast or Central Command in the Middle East definitely focused more specifically on Afghanistan and then Iraq.
Yeah, okay, because both countries, both the Philippines and the United States, I think, took naturally advantage of the situation. The Philippines know they're going to get a lot of military aid, and there's been tensions between the Philippines and closing down, Subic Bay and Clark, and so now we thought we could get back in there, and they were happy to have us there. We wanted to be there, and now it's even kind of played out in terms of getting a foothold again against China, 15 years down the road. So it's been kind of an interesting kind of play out in terms of that. So, okay, so how about yourself in terms of the military?
Yeah, well, I was a crew chief on H-64 Apache helicopters, so that was an aerial gunship providing support for ground troops. I didn't have the opportunity to go downrange to Afghanistan or Iraq, but I worked with a lot of people that did, and I would hear their stories, and some of the things they saw and some of the stories I heard was just, intense fighting. I work with some people who had lost some friends over there, unfortunately, and I mean, there are some people that just hate us out there, and obviously the reasons for that are many. I'm not here to discuss that, but needless to say, we have people that aren't afraid to take the fight to them, and glad that we have that.
Okay, good. I'll have some follow-up questions. We're going to take a break now. My name is Dr. James Primm. This is Global Connections. This is Michael Lanza and Allen Bageant, and we'll be back shortly.
Aloha! Hello, my name is Patrick Bratton. I'm host of Global Connections here at ThinkTech Hawaii. We broadcast live every Thursday at 1 p.m. We bring Hawaii to the world and the world to Hawaii, talking about international events and various things of interest to the audience. Please join me. I look forward to talking with you and having you get to meet some of my guests. Aloha.
Aloha, namaskar, and hello. My name is Anu Hittel, and I host a show, Climate Change Beyond Outrage. In it, we go beyond outrage to look at solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. Join me every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Hawaii Standard Time. See you then.
Aloha, my name is Carl Campagna. I'm the host of ThinkTech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. You can see our show every Wednesday at noon at 12 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com, as well as visiting YouTube and finding the link for the show there. The show is also aired on OC16. We look forward to seeing you on the show. We have many wonderful guests, including Joan Husted, Corey Rosenlee, where we talk about the very important issues of education for our keiki. We look forward to seeing you there. Mahalo.
Hello, my name is Dr. James Primm, and this is Global Connections. I'm the guest host today. I'm a professor of international relations at Hawaii Pacific University, and I have two students with me, and we've been talking about terrorism, and we're going to continue this conversation. This is Michael Lanza and Allen Bageant, and so the next question I want to ask them is pretty open-ended, but I think to me it's probably the key question of the whole issue of the war on terror, is what was the connection between 9/11 and Iraq, and whether Iraq was perhaps a disaster going the wrong direction, or as perhaps somebody like Colin Powell says, taking our eye off the ball, or was it a necessary extension of the war on terrorism to try to bring some stability to the Middle East? So I know that's a large question, but we'll take only a couple hours for each one of them. So Alan, I'll start with you, and then I'll move back to Mike.
All right, so remember at the time, everybody thought Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And it was and he wanted us to believe
Right,
that.
right.
Turns out, if he didn't actually have them, it was to at least let the Ayatollahs, his Shia rivals in Iran, think that he did, and it was the leverage of that
And us too,
fear.
as enemies. He wanted people to think
He
it
wanted
was
people to
true.
think it, but everybody believed it,
Yeah, that's right.
possibly because it was true. So that, and plus he had used chemicals of, weapons of mass death plenty of times. Obviously, the Kurds and the
Iranians too as well.
against the Iranians, around Basra, he'd used them on his own people. So we knew he had at least used something like that. Even if it doesn't make a large explosion, it's still arguably a weapon of mass destruction. The buildings are still there, the people are all dead. Plus, he had violated the UN brokered peace agreement from the first Gulf War 17 times. We just chose to never enforce it. Throughout the Clinton years, we just chose to let it go because we didn't want to get involved in it. We just sort of wished away a problem. So I won't say that Bush was not justified in going in, but it's very easily to argue how we went in or the after effects or the lack of planning. But as far as the actual decision to go in, I don't necessarily disagree with, because what we'll never know is what if we had not. Nobody ever says, everyone says, well, it was a terrible idea to do it. But nobody says, well, what if we hadn't? What if he had nuclear weapons? What if he actually did set off some chemical weapon in London through an agent, or drop the bomb on Paris through some proxies or something? We don't know. So we'll never know what if we hadn't done it. We just can argue about how it was done.
Right. Okay. And we certainly could argue a lot of that, but that's not the case. Because also America was still, psychologically damaged in many ways, and we were afraid. And there was also, perhaps President Clinton, the Democrats were not willing to kind of to fight it and debate it. The biggest problem I will see in terms of there just wasn't enough open debate about whether this was the proper thing to do or not. But the nation was ready to follow the commander-in-chief, and pretty much that's what they did. And you say hindsight is going to be 20/20 down the road. So, Mike? Yeah,
well, I was about 8 or 9 years old back when the first Gulf War invasion happened. I remember my parents were glued to the TV, and I was like, what's going on? And they said, we're going to get this bad man, Saddam. And so I grew up with this idea of, Saddam Hussein being this terrible dictator. Sure. So when 2003 rolled around, I was at work one day, and, I see that we've invaded. I was like, great, let's go in and get them. I'm thinking 9/11, fresh memories of, the Twin Towers falling. And granted, didn't have the evidence. I didn't have the information like most Americans did. I was just going off emotions. And
I don't think most Americans had that information at that time, or the debate wasn't strong enough, unfortunately.
Sure, but in hindsight, it's, I don't think we had an exit strategy, and I think that's why we're, paying the high price now with what's going on over there. And I think it's going to take years until all those documents become declassified to see what really happened and why we really went in. Yeah. I don't think it was for oil, though.
Yeah,
I don't.
No, nothing's for ever one cause. But because I was teaching the class and following it very quickly, what I found to be most interesting that there were, the people who Bush decided to surround himself with, the experts other than Colin Powell, or the people who had never been in the military. They hadn't had really much experience, and they, kind of the neoconservatives, and they were kind of trying to atone perhaps for Vietnam, perhaps certainly for not finishing the job against Saddam Hussein. And so they had some kind of an agenda, but there wasn't anybody kind of in. Colin Powell, to his credit, says, okay, internally I will debate this, but externally I'm still with the commander-in-chief, and that's kind of my role in terms of kind of following all.
And I'm sure for Bush too, it was fresh in his mind too, with the Iran-Iraq war and invasion of Kuwait. What's he going to do next? Right.
And I guess Bush is not a student of foreign policy. He took a lot of advice from the leadership, which he probably should have. So that kind of played out that way. But I also remember at the time when General Shinseki just kind of said, if we're going to go in here, we have to go in with a couple 100,000 people. It's going to take a long time. It's more, you take more kind of forces to secure and stabilize the society, and going in people like Wolfowitz just kind of dismissed him, and eventually they drummed him out of the military, and he was absolutely correct, but he just never got much of a voice or wasn't listened to at the time. So, okay.
Who was actually recommended against him having weapons, and therefore that we should go and do something about it, was the Department of Energy. Of all the agencies in the U.S. government, the only one that really said we probably should slow this down is the Department of Energy.
Yeah, yeah. And we had through the UN inspectors, people in and out of there, they had a pretty good
And again-
idea of what was in there and what was not in there.
And again, so much of that access was denied, so it looks like you're covering
Yeah,
something
no,
up.
absolutely. I mean,
So-
you know, 'cause Saddam Hussein kind of put his own neck in the noose because he tried to play a short-term game, and it was just kind of, he was bluffing, and people
And
finally called his bluff.
I don't think he expected Bush to call him on the bluff.
Yeah,
That he didn't think Bush would really do it.
Yeah, yeah. After 9/11, I think that was pretty an insane, proposition, but he did it. He did. And also, as you say, the argument is, well, as bad as he was, and he was a horrible person, and I think again the debate should have been on whether to remove him because of his,
I think
actions against his own people. In other words, 9/11 wasn't really it. It wasn't up to the mass destruction. This guy, if you're going to be kind of a liberal intervention, he's murdered several hundred thousand of those people. That's why we should go.
I think one of the lessons is looking back at H.W. Bush is that perhaps he had it right not going after, because you're going to be criticized either way.
Yeah.
So remember, just 91, everybody said, well, he didn't have it in him to finish the job, and he left him in power. He didn't solve the problem. Well, the mission was to remove Iraq from Kuwait.
That's right. It was a United Nations mission, and that was the mission, and they accomplished that. And so then he said, okay, we've accomplished the mission, we're going home.
And think of all the blood and money that was saved by not occupying Iraq after that. He just reset it and let it be known, hey, we'll come in whenever we have to. And I think H.W. Bush doesn't get the credit for not having toppled Saddam the first time.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure he had a different insight too, being the former head of the CIA. I'm sure that he had assessed the situation. If we had taken Saddam out of the picture, we'd be facing the same problems we're facing now with ISIS rising up, in Iraq and Syria. So,
Well, he had some pretty good advisors, Snowcroft and Indy Powell. They're realists, and they said, and they're products of Vietnam. We don't want to get in some kind of land war we can't get out of, but we need an exit strategy, as you say. We need to have some goals and objectives, and they're dealing with kind of intelligence rather than emotion. And so much of foreign policy, whether we like it or not, is emotion. When people are screaming for things, people have to react to that. Let me kind of, again, keep it open in terms of, we've had a lot of time to think about the legacy of George Bush and what he did right or what he did wrong. So I'd like maybe a general opinion of both of you guys in terms of how you think he did, and then we'll go on to Obama and then try to look into the future a little bit. So either one of you.
Well, start with the good. I think the reaction to fight back was overdue. In D.C., or at least in the intelligence community, Osama bin Laden was no mystery. He had committed terror acts before. There were Al-Qaeda existed. There were lots of Islamic terrorism had not been formed in 2001, and we just chose to sort of ignore it for various reasons. We had other issues, but we just didn't really fight it until it came out of Afghanistan with the help of an organized government. So I would say Bush was right to declare a war on terror, and I could to sort of give emphasis to the problem, that this is going to be an enduring struggle that we're going to have from now on. This is a new reality. We will have to combat this wherever it exists. Now, the bad part about that is biting off more than you can chew. When you get into nation building, when you say you want to rebuild Afghanistan, well, rebuild what? It was never built, never has been. So Iraq, granted it for a Middle Eastern country, it was fairly well off per capita standard of living. However, the act of destroying and then rebuilding, and the blood and money that it takes to do that, diminishes your readiness everywhere else. And the appetite, so when ISIS comes along, nobody wants to do anything. Or if there's terrorism in Libya, well, now we don't really want to do that because we've just been worn out. Psychologically, people are just drained of it. And part of that is because we had a lot of unnecessary deaths, in my opinion, that were caused by the nation-building aspect after the actual fight. Because the actual toppling of the Iraqi military or the Taliban government was not hard. relatively speaking. It's the after effects of putting our troops in harm's way to sort of build a country in our own image that's not realistic.
And I think you're right. Andrew Basevich at Boston University, again, a career military man, but he's a realist. And he's written, all the time about the limits of power. We in America have this great vision in terms of we're the good guys, which we mostly are, and we can solve any problem. But there are some problems, you may solve one problem, but you can't solve them all at the same time. There's limits to everything, and sometimes we just don't recognize it.
Yeah, I just think that maybe he bit off a little bit more than you can chew. Going into Afghanistan, I mean, most Americans were for it. We had a coalition of something like 30 countries that are behind us. So we had most of the world's support to go in there and to get the people that did what they did to us on 9/11. And going into Iraq after that, I really feel like we should have closed the door on Afghanistan first if we were going to do that. Now we have a two-front war we got to fight. Our treasure's being poured out into the Middle East, and we're losing American soldiers over there. They're coming back maimed, injured, without limbs. These are complex issues that we have to face now as a generation. How are we going to pay off these debts? How are we going to regain our image in the world as the United States? A fight for good. These are things that we shouldn't have to worry about.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. And what's interesting to me is I'm so-called on the left and have a lot of criticism, but often we just kind of on that philosophical point, we talk to ourselves. So I really appreciate talking to people in the military, because it's not like, okay, they're all a bunch of knuckle draggers and are pro-war and the other ones are a bunch of wimpy doves. There's a complexity to that. And so certainly the military who had to pay the dues, to me it's very angering as any American saying, if you bring them over there, bring them over the right equipment, the right mission, the right exit strategy for the right reason. And so at the end of the day, to me, Iraq was just totally separate from 9/11. And even people again like Colin Powell said, we just should have finished the job with Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, and then we could have another debate about whether how much of a security threat or national strategic threat that Saddam Hussein is. The other counter to that, as well, as bad as he was, if his sons would have gotten power, who seemed to be totally crazy, they would have maybe even been worse and do the things that we thought that maybe Saddam Hussein might have done. So it's a problem. Okay, then we have the transition to again, a liberal so-called president rather than more conservative president. Obama took over, so maybe again it's pretty open-ended in terms of how you feel either he's done at the time and maybe 8 years later, because it's changed. The world's changed, the battle's changed, everything else. So we'll start with Ellen again.
Well, let's start with the good. I would say that there's more bad than good, but the good part would be how he increased drone strikes. It's a lot safer for the Americans to use the drones, and we're talking about like Peshawar, the tribal areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan border. As he stepped those, now he's since dialed that back a lot, but initially he increased that a lot, and I think that saves a lot more Afghan civilian lives, Afghan military lives, innocent Pakistani lives, and obviously American lives, coalition soldiers. So no one on the right's going to complain about, hey, we're striking terrorists. Good. I'm not going to criticize that. And everybody on the left would always give him a free pass no matter what he did. So if he does something that they would absolutely rant and rave about had Bush done it, even if it's the right thing, which I think striking terrorists is a good thing, well, if he does it, he gets a pass, and therefore it's not reported. It's great. So I think that was a good thing. I think he's going to be criticized either way about withdrawing troops from Iraq or Afghanistan, because yes, he inherited the problem when he didn't ask for all those troops to be there, and there's no end to it. He's right to say that at some point, in so many words, they're going to have to do it. So what's the perfect number? Shall we leave 100,000 troops in Afghanistan so that we stabilize it, and for how long? It's open-ended. So at some point, he's right to dial that back. Although we're obviously going to have some, we haven't defeated them totally, and this is both countries. So There's going to be ISIS, there's going to be the Taliban. The Taliban are going to come back. So the only way to prevent that is just an open-ended occupation. However, to get to the part I disagree with,
Well, why don't we hold that off?
Sure.
Because we want to talk. So
Yeah.
this is interesting, and because there is pros and cons of all that. And all presidents, as you say, they're damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Right.
That's why I never chose to run for the presidency. But my name is Dr. James Primm. This is Global Connections, and we're talking about terrorism today with Allen Bageant and Mike Lanza, and we will be right back.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on Think Tech. This show is so very dear to my heart. We talk with artists of various different ilk here about the process that they go through for their art. So we talk about what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they do it. And it's a show that is inspiring. This is what I hear from people all the time. And a show that will teach you something, sometimes something about yourself. I hope you'll join us. The show is Center Stage. It's on Think Tech every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. We'll see you then.
Aloha! How you doing? It's me, Angus McTech, wishing you to welcome and join us to see us on Hibachi Talk on Think Tech Hawaii. Join my co-hosts, Gordo the Tech Czar and Andrew the Security Guy, every Friday from 1300 to 1345. We look forward to seeing you. We'll talk tech and we'll have some wee bit of fun. And remember, let your wing gang free wherever you be. Aloha!
O'Reilly there? All right, okay.
Aloha, this is Dr. James Primm. I'm a professor of international relations at Hawaii Pacific University, and this is Global Connections, and today we're talking about the quote-unquote war on terrorism. I have with me two of my students. One is a present student, and one is a former student, and it's Allen Bageant and Michael Lanza, and we're going to come back to Allen, because Allen we talked about how President Bush, what he did well or what he did poorly about with respect to the war on terrorism, in the same way with President Obama. So he talked about the positive things he thought that Obama did, and now he's going to talk about perhaps what he thinks are some of the shortcomings. And then Mike will answer the same question. Okay, go ahead.
I think Obama's first problem is that he needs to call Islamic terrorism what it is. That if we can't address the problem or define the problem, then we can't tackle the problem. And we can't just wish away a problem. We can't scrub it from the news, because in this 24/7 media environment, it gets out that there are a lot of terror attacks still happening. ISIS should not have been a surprise. There are a lot of things in the world, speaking from a terrorism perspective, that we could be working harder to prevent instead of wishing away. I think that Obama's using the military more as a social experiment than a fighting force. We don't seem to, I can't imagine us really fighting for much anymore. And that's not the role of the military. We're used more for, because we volunteered, we cannot disagree with whatever new social policy that has nothing, that's made by bureaucrats that have no military experience or regard for the fighting effectiveness of the military. And it sort of places this burden that kills morale that I'm speaking for myself, but
Sure.
Just doesn't feel like we are much more than a political prop for politicians to stand behind them when they give a speech, as opposed to being ready to fight against all of our major threats from state or non-state actors. Feels like more of a, not Peace Corps, but we're just not used the way we're supposed to be.
Okay, good.
Yeah, Obama, I feel like he's taken too much time in making a lot of decisions politically, internationally. I feel that our image in the world has gone down. People don't respect us the way they used to. Going into his presidency, I know that he wanted to take us out of Iraq and Afghanistan. To his defense, I mean, obviously he realized once he took office that it wasn't as easy as he had promised. I think the legacy of Obama for my generation, Generation Y, is going to be what he did with Cuba. I think it's great. I think the Cold War grudge that we've carried against them is going to set the precedent to work with other countries such as North Korea, maybe Pakistan. That hey, we have this bad past, but we're willing to work with you. And I think that's one of the best things he ever did with his presidency.
Okay, and then generally I kind of agree with you, but also I think Alan would probably say, and I would say too, the other side gets a vote. And unfortunately, obviously, we're not going to sit down with ISIS or Al Qaeda anytime soon. We're not even going to sit down with the North Koreans. There are some people you can move towards diplomacy. We can move towards diplomacy, and other people, they're just kind of the military solution. Unfortunately, is about the only one. So it's a complex world out there. And as the president, he always has to kind of make this choice of what's the right way to do it. Is it a combination of intelligence, sanctions, and maybe some military threats and force if necessary, or do we just want to kind of use the United Nations as a vehicle? And sometimes you're wrong. There's no magic strategy one way or the other in terms of how you play that out. So, okay, let me kind of, this is a kind of perhaps a trite question, but it's important. Are we safer or less safe since 9/11? And we, because sometimes when we say we, I mean, this is a war on terrorism. You mentioned there was people from over 70 countries who were killed in the World Trade Center. I think we should have pushed that more. I think one of the mistakes that President Bush did says it's our struggle. Well, R to me should have been global rather than through the United Nations and necessary coalitions rather than the United States of America. And maybe we can get back to that. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't fail. But I guess generally, do you think, not necessarily personally more safe or less safe, but the United States in a better place or worse place, or certainly Europe and the rest of the world? So let's start with you, Mike.
It's to give an easy answer, I'd say we're more safe. This is going off personal experience. I traveled internationally last summer to a foreign country for the first time, and I just felt this great outpouring of support towards me for being an American. People wanted to hear, what I had to say. They were interested in my political. To Lima, Peru.
Okay, good.
And I had a great time. People loved the fact that I was an American, to my surprise. And it doesn't mean I'm safe if I go to Syria or if I go to the Middle East. But I don't feel like I'm going to wake up tomorrow to another terrorist attack hitting. So maybe I'm a little naive, but I feel like we're safer.
Okay, good. No, I don't think so. We spent a lot of time and money we'll talk about prevent the second attack, quote unquote.
I would say that we are less safe, and I don't think Obama has done much to make us safer, but this is not entirely his fault. I don't think he takes the problem seriously. Remember, he went golfing when Americans were being beheaded by ISIS, dismissed them as the junior varsity, sort of just pretend that they're not there because they're politically inconvenient. Same thing with attacks in Benghazi. That's just a right-wing conspiracy again. Well, you have to at least address these things. Well, part of the reason that we're less safe, and I'll admit that I can't explain why fully we haven't been attacked like we were on 9/11. There have been a lot of thwarted attacks, and a lot of it's just idiocy, where the guy in Times Square who's smoked up his own car, the shoe bomber tackled by the Flying Dutchman off the KLM flight. So there's several times he got close and it just hasn't worked out. But thankfully, and that's just not pure luck, but the intelligence, the military have done their part as much as they can. But I think the increasing open borders of the U.S. and Europe can only be bad for national security. Paris is the easiest example of the so-called refugees who just killed as many people as possible. So there are plenty of Iraqis and Syrians that are passing right through Cuba on their way to Mexico to walk into the U.S. And yes, there hasn't been a major attack, but this can't be good. This is only making us less safe.
Okay. We only have about 4 minutes, and but I think we have to realize that we're spending at least $60-80 billion a year on intelligence, your job. The military is spending, billions of dollars. In other words, I think 9/11 was not necessarily a one-off, but it was we weren't keeping our eye on the ball. Now people's looking at it all the time. So I don't think you can have that level of attack again. Hopefully, but there's still possibilities of weapons of mass destruction. The threat is still there.
And I'd like to add one more thing, and this is nobody's fault, really, but the advance in technology makes it a lot easier to use technology for bad reasons.
And good reasons. The other both.
Sure, but using cell phones, using email accounts to to how they transfer information slyly. Well, there are plenty of examples of how the proliferation of technology, if you don't know how to build a bomb, look it up on the internet.
Sure.
You can just look at a Google Earth shot, where do people gather, what's the best place to attack. It's not just a guy showing up with a knife. Because of the advent of technology, it's easier for bad people to spread bad ideas.
Okay. Well, with that, then, maybe a closing thing. Whether you're optimistic or not pessimistic, that may be the wrong word in terms of the future of the war on terrorism. Is it going to be? It's going to be decades. It's going to be centuries. We're going to manage it. I mean, I use a book called What Terrorists Want by Louise Richardson, and she makes the model of maybe we should look at terrorism kind of like what the British did with the IRA. They're a problem, but they're not an existential problem. They can't defeat us, but we have to deal with it socially, politically, militarily, and contain them, almost like we contained the Soviet Union, and eventually the momentum will kind of put it away. There's not going to be a victory over terrorism anytime soon. It's just much more muddy than that, much more long end. But let me give it to either one of you guys for the last couple of minutes in terms of your general feeling of optimism or pessimism.
I'm extremely optimistic. I think that generations now are more informed than ever before. I think that they're not willing to put up with the political rhetoric of, this is the bad guy and this is why. Well, we want to know why. And diplomatically, we want solutions that are going to be cohesive for both sides. So I may not agree with Obama, but I think his last State of the Union address, I agree with him. I have more faith in my country now than I ever have before. And we're not, we have real problems, but we also can have real solutions out of that. So.
Very good. Alan?
I'd like to share your optimism, but perhaps it's the line of work I'm in. We are constantly looking at the threats to the, I guess you ask a policeman, is crime going away? Then they're not going to say yes. But I think that the average American just doesn't care, and that's the problem. Is they know who won the last 5 American Idols, but not who won the last 5 presidential elections, and they can't. I mean, after all these years of fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, and all the thousands of lives we've lost, the average American, I'll blame the millennials. They're so fun to pick on, but they don't know where these places are. Still. They don't know. So should we go into Syria? Well, they don't even know where Syria is. How about Libya? If you still can't find Iraq, forget about Libya. So it's just, I think that people get so disconnected because it doesn't directly affect them, and they don't follow what's really going on out there. That for lots of good reasons, people are busy. People have lives, but I think the lack of attention to detail is how we get in this problem in the first place.
The devil's in the detail. But one of the things they could do to learn is listen to programs like this, and we're going to have to finish it off. And I really appreciate both Alan and Michael giving their perspectives, certainly from a military perspective, a student perspective, and just a human citizen perspective. So my name is Dr. James Primm. Thank you for joining us today. I'm a professor of political science at Hawaii Pacific University, and this is Global Connections.